understand Arabic. I can speak Arabic, but when making these presentations, I feel more comfortable to speak in English. So, but I can speak Arabic and understand Arabic very well. So I'm sorry if I'm making this presentation in English. I'll start with a bit of history on PKI. Like 20 years ago, and when SSL protocol was implemented as a means to provide a mechanism to secure communications between web browsers and web servers. And obviously at that time, there was a security need to ensure that if I'm talking to this like service provider's website, it is a genuine website and not a fake site. And obviously, SSL allowed So SSL allowed to provide this mechanism, and SSL basically provided the first business case for PKI, whereby certification authorities were created to issue the so-called SSL certificates, and organizations came together to create the so-called Web Trust framework that one of the brothers from CDC was referring to earlier today. So the Web Trust framework was there to somehow provide a mechanism to accredit certification authorities to issue SSL certificates. So the first business case for PKI, securing communication between browsers and web servers. And it happened very well, and then certification authorities managed to get a fair amount of money out of this particular business. And that was around 1996. And I think it's fair to talk about this as the first killer application for PKI. What happened after that is that towards the end of the 90s, through the 1999, government started to worry about digital identity and the fact that it was easy to fake your identity card, to spoof your identity while doing transactions online. And government started to investigate the means to have a secure digital identity. And cutting the story short, European countries came together and then defined the so-called European legislation on digital signatures. And that provided a context for countries to implement at national level electronic identity cards. And I think all of you being like Saudi nationals would have an electronic identity card in your wallet, and the ID card addressed again a major security concern, which is like identity spoofing, and the context to have electronic identity cards allowed government somehow to store on these identity cards digital certificates, so that they wanted to use this opportunity to use the ID card not only as a token to allow you to demonstrate your identity while transacting online, but it was also a first tentative to try to sign digital transactions. But again, the need for PKI at that time was security, and ID cards was the killer application. After SSL, identity card was the second somehow killer application for PKI, mostly because certification authorities needed to be established in order to issue the so-called digital certificates to be stored on the ID card. But again, the need was a security need and not necessarily a business need. And over these years, people were trying somehow to convince service providers to integrate PKI within their applications, arguing that apart from security, some of the other KPIs would be improved, user experience, cost optimization, but it never happened. So the business case wasn't necessarily there. And eventually, the ID card that we have as of today is still in general used as a physical identification token, despite the fact that you have many service providers that enable their applications to use the ID card. And since the ID card started to be issued, and in fact Saudi was an early adopter of basically identity card. They started in fact around 2001, phase 1 identity card, and 2007, 2008, phase 2 identity cards, and a lot has happened in terms of technology evaluation. But since then, I think it's fair to assume that not much has happened in terms of like doing or conducting transactions with these identity cards. Mostly because I believe the way PKI was promoted and the need for PKI was mostly a security need and not necessarily a need to leverage and improve some other KPIs apart from security while using the ID cards. Until governments, including the government of the kingdom, including the UAE, including in fact many governments in the region, including all governments worldwide, that decided to integrate into their visions. For Saudi, it's 2030 vision. For UAE, it's the 2020 vision. Decided to include So can you not hear me? So I have to. I have a problem to stand up and speak, but fair enough. Right. So معلش استعمل هذا يعني? Is it fine? It's okay. All right. So until this government decided somehow to embrace innovation and disruptive technologies into their vision. And if you look into the 2030 vision, there are statements in there clearly mentioning that the country is going to endorse innovative and disruptive technologies as a means somehow to move from the existing economy to a smart economy, as a means to implement smart governments and so on. And obviously, what this means effectively, it means that technologies such as the Internet of Things, such as blockchains, and more importantly, such as digital signatures are required in order somehow to meet this vision. And therefore, this is the next business case, killer application for PKI, and I believe this is the first time we don't need to talk anymore about PKI. We don't need to talk anymore about selling PKI, mostly because PKI is required in order to meet a specific business outcome. You just can't go for a paperless economy. You cannot have full mobility. You cannot transact from anywhere, from any device, if you don't have a security framework that includes digital signatures. And I just wanted to start with this little story. Obviously, I started by saying that over the last 20 years, many people try to say that PKI is dead, and then other people, claiming that PKI is long-lived and so on, mostly because it was all about security and how PKI is there to improve the overall security of a certain ecosystem. It's very important to keep in mind that PKI is there also to improve a very important KPI, which is cost optimization. And this is a slide that is somehow a tentative to show some metrics. And if you consider a medium organization having 500 employees and the average cost of ink, the average cost of paper, and the average cost to manage paper within the enterprise, I think it would be fair to assume that every single enterprise needs to invest around $1 million per year only in dealing with paper. And that's mandatory, and this is based on average cost of paper and average cost of managing paper within the enterprise. And obviously, as soon as you decide to move for a paperless economy, full mobility, therefore, you have to get rid of paper, and therefore, all these costs will be in one or another cost optimization on the government. I guess some of the colleagues have mentioned already the challenges around paper and the challenges of dealing with paper and the advantages somehow of moving to e-documents and signed e-documents. This slide that shows about, this slide summarizes the challenges of dealing with paper, and I think these challenges are obvious to many of you guys. And for the sake of time, I'm gonna move to the next slide. This slide is only a tentative to mention that every single document within the enterprise can potentially be signed. This slide, and I realize some of you guys might wonder how these statistics are there, but this slide shows some of the major KPIs that the leadership in this country is going to look at over years as part of the Vision 2030 implementation. And some of these KPIs are obviously security, flexibility, efficiency, and saving time while conducting transactions, and then user experience and improving the collaboration, within and between the government entities. And this slide shows, based on some statistics that we have done and information that we would have collected, that the KPIs, the existing KPIs, will be improved, if we move for digital signatures, 100% for security, 80% flexibility, 300% save time, and then collaboration 80%. And this is based on statistical research that we would have done, and I'm more than happy to discuss it with you. But I mean, trust that these are somehow genuine numbers. And this is what's going to matter as part of the 2030 strategy execution. Obviously, security is a very important topic, but I mean, cost optimization, collaboration, conducting more and more transactions is really what's going to matter over the coming years. Obviously, PKI and digital signature remove paper issues. And again, this slide summarizes, for each challenge, how digital signatures, can resolve the challenge. And for the sake of time, I'm going to move to the next slide. And I'm more than happy to discuss, how digital signatures is able to improve each of these elements of dealing with paper, and how these are somehow resolved when dealing with digital signatures. This slide is just summarizing that digital signatures and PKI will be in your day-to-day over the coming month, over the coming years. And I think it's not about whether we need PKI or not. It's about whether you coming from government entities are going to be early adopters. It's about basically who's going to be the early adopter. It's about who's going to be doing it the first time, and who's going to basically push the others to be followers. And obviously, PKI is going to be all over, certainly while transacting on mobile portals, conducting mobile transactions. But more importantly, beyond the traditional, mobile and government services that end users will be accessing on day-to-day, but also in order to provide a secure framework for the digital economy and for the Internet of Things, for the blockchain, for the smart meters, for the smart grid, and for whatever is smart. And therefore, PKI is going to be in the middle of all these platforms and all these disruptive technologies. And I think it's fair to assume that those people that will be talking about PKI will be talking about PKI in the context of integrated platforms, in the context of a specific business objective that we're trying to achieve, as opposed to talk about PKI as a pure subject matter, which is eventually quite complicated for end users to understand. PKI is a major building block of a smart environment. I'm not sure, how many of you guys are already exposed to the Internet of Things. Some of the governments in the region are basically embracing the IoT. In fact, the kingdom is also looking into it, from a governance standpoint. But other countries are into the Internet of Things already through the implementation of a sort of IoT platform that is multi-tenant, that can be offered to the major critical infrastructures. And this is a slide that shows the end-to-end ecosystem of an IoT environment. And PKI today is a major building block of a secure IoT environment for various reasons. This slide is summarizing some of the challenges that an IoT, a national IoT initiative would have to address. And
And then the vendors and the experts have agreed that PKI is going to be the technology that's going to support a secure IoT framework over the coming years at least. Certainly through securing communication between the sensor itself and the backend IoT platform, but also to secure confidentiality of the data while stored, while persistent, and beyond that. Some of you guys may have heard about blockchain and the fact that it's going to be the next IT generation. And I think, over 2019, 2020, a lot is going to happen in Saudi around blockchain, certainly specifying a sort of governance framework for implementing, rolling out blockchain in the kingdom. If you look into PKI and how it relates to blockchain, there's this so-called PKI securing a blockchain environment, but there's also a blockchain environment somehow complementing PKI. And as it stands today, what we know about PKI and how it is implemented today, it's effectively PKI to support the so-called open blockchain so that eventually you provide a secure enrollment process for blockchain. In a blockchain to implement government use cases require that people are provisioned securely into the blockchain, and the importance of who is transacting on the blockchain is important, and the importance of confidentiality of the blockchain transaction is also important. Therefore, there's a framework that was specified in the literature whereby PKI is recognized today as the underlying technology to support a blockchain environment. And without getting into too much technical details, the idea is that there is a setup, PKI setup in there that allows every party that is transacting and that is pushing a transaction into the blockchain to leverage, PKI, I would say, as we know it today to a large extent. However, there are people that are claiming, rightly I think, that PKI as we know it today is going to disappear or at least is going to evolve towards an infrastructure that is blockchain enabled. And while we have today PKI supporting a blockchain setup, what we're going to have in the future, we're going to have a setup where somehow the services that you are going to access in order to transact and in order to do some validation are going to be actually services exposed by a blockchain, government blockchain or commercial blockchain. And therefore, the PKI supporting this, whether it is OCSP for certificate validation, whether it is a service for signature verification or any PKI services as we know today, could potentially be available through services exposed by the blockchain. And the experts think that this is where PKI is moving, this is where PKI is evolving. Obviously, there's a debate, among the experts. Certain people think that PKI, as we know today, is going to completely disappear, which means, in one way or another, some of the investments that would have been done would have to be reshaped in one way or another. On the other hand, there is also a large portion of the experts that think that PKI, a large portion of the PKI as we know today is going to be there, but it has to evolve in order to expose blockchain-related services as opposed to the HTTP services that are known today. This slide is somehow a tentative to show the sort of pilots that are being implemented today in order to have a sort of blockchain replacing PKI in exposing some of the traditional services related to certificate validation, related to OCSP, related to digital signature validation through a blockchain. And this is happening now, and there are pilots that are being done. I think it's fair to assume that within 5 years' time, this is going to be within the products. So that's PKI and blockchain. think a bit of PKI for e-participation. PKI has been used since many years and is still used somehow for e-participation as the underlying technology to support elections and to enable somehow the government to communicate with the critical mass of citizens and residents. And that's there. Innovation is happening today on how is it that we can do it without using the ID card, with using technologies such as remote signing, leveraging biometrics, and so on, and yet being able to cope with some important requirements of the elections and the voting, which is anonymity. So that was the first part of my presentation, talking a bit of history and some of what's going on currently around PKI. How much time do I still have, sorry? 15 minutes? I still need 10 minutes minimum. Is it okay? All right. This is few slides to talk about the latest state of the art of basically national level digital identity. Some of you guys know the ID card. I've mentioned about the ID cards. And obviously the promise at that time, of those people that were behind the ID card is somehow to use the ID card as a token to do physical identification, but more importantly, as a token that would allow you somehow to transact digitally. And eventually, the vision was somehow to have one identity, one ID card used to access, service providers across many domains with single sign-on. And I think it's fair to accept that the ID card has failed its mandate as such token for various reasons, not necessarily related to the ID card itself, but to the fact that the ID card required an infrastructure around it, required smart card readers, required the end user to install some middlewares, and so on and so on. And therefore, while the ID card is recognized today as a very strong physical identification token, but the ID card failed its mandate to be the token that's going to be used to transact. And I think, for the sake of time, the doctor and some of the colleagues have mentioned about the remote signing and this so-called digital ID or virtual ID, which is somehow an alternative to the ID card that's being implemented now. Countries are already issuing the so-called virtual ID card. It relies on the concept of remote signing. It relies on credentials that are stored on the cloud, on a secure cloud, accessed securely by the end user. I don't have time to talk too much about it, but I think some of the colleagues would have discussed about it, and unfortunately we don't have too much time to discuss it. But it's happening now. It's happening in many countries, and I guess some of the colleagues already mentioned that the kingdom is considering this technology, and it's fair to assume that within the next 2 years, each of you guys would have a digital ID, and you will be using the ID card to enroll securely into the digital ID, and therefore the mission of the ID card will evolve to become the token that's going to allow you to be enrolled securely into these kind of critical services, as opposed to be the actual token that's going to allow you to transact securely. Yeah. I don't have, unfortunately, time to discuss this. I have so much to say around this. I'm implementing this in many countries, but I guess whenever you want, I'm available to brainstorm. And I think that with the digital ID, with the virtual smart card, we're going to achieve eventually the so-called one identity and the fact that you can use this identity in order to transact across the many service providers. Pki Solutions Evolving over time. I think I wanted to use these slides to maybe remind us all on how Pki has evolved. Unfortunately, I don't have too much time, but I mean, first versions of, CAs came with the ability to issue digital certificates. Then next generation brought some online services, whether it is OCSP or timestamping, and therefore, relieving people from the need to download large files in order to do local validations. That's the second generation. Third generation brought the ability for you to be able to integrate PKI within your applications without being obliged to have developers that know about PKI. And with this like third generation of PKI, it was very easy to implement PKI-enabled applications by clever developers as opposed to be clever cryptographers or clever PKI developers. You just didn't need to have people that understand PKI in order to integrate PKI into your applications. So that's the third generation. And I think it's fair to assume that the majority of people that are going to consume PKI today will be consuming these kind of services. However, the so-called PKI as a solution exists today. And I've seen the colleague talking about the fact that PKI is being integrated into a finite environment, into an Oracle environment, into an IBM environment, and there are solutions today whereby PKI offers an end-to-end ability for you not only to be able to sign digitally, but more importantly, to fit into an enterprise ecosystem. So if you look into any enterprise, it would have on-site applications, it would have remote applications, it would have some sort of filenet in one another, it would have some sort of ERP, whether it is SAP, Oracle Dynamics, or anything else. It would have a user base, on-site, remote, and eventually, more than happy to discuss it in details with you, but I think it's fair to say that today there are end-to-end solutions that allow you somehow to integrate PKI within your enterprise ecosystem without disrupting your existing ecosystem. And that's the latest, basically, I would say, generation of PKI, which we call, as SMRs, PKI as a full solution. Can I still have 5 minutes? I don't know. Yeah. Perhaps this slide, only as a tentative to talk about a typical case that we see a lot today. A lot of the people that we talk to, I think, are able to understand, what digital certificates are. They are able to integrate digital certificates and PKI, as a two-factor authentication mechanism to access their online services. And they also get the idea to sign digitally. They get it, and they understand that the services are there today, and they understand that it's easy to do it today, or it's easier as it used to be. However, a lot of their question is, what do I do with the PDF document? What do I do with the signed PDF document once I create it? I mean, this document needs to be available in 10 years, for whatever reason. And the simplest way to look into this today, noting that a lot of the organizations would require that you store your PDF documents on your content management system, whether it is Finet or anything. What we see a lot is the so-called evidence store, and the evidence store is either a proprietary database, and in many occasions, it's your FileNet, it's your SharePoint, and therefore, eventually, you are not disrupting too much your existing environment if you want to deal with digital signatures. At the end of the day, the services or the online services for you to integrate digital signatures into the applications is there. It's exposed through services from the NCDC, from some of the service providers in the kingdom. But more importantly, you do have a FileNet, and keep in mind that this would be the repository where you store your documents for future validations. And this is a typical scenario that we find in enterprises today. I don't think I'm going to get into this. I don't have the time, unfortunately, but this was somehow a tentative to address a question, I think, from the brother here. الأخ أنت سألت سؤال on whether I need to issue digital certificates myself. Why is it like it's not the NCDC that gives me the digital certificates? If the colleagues from NCDC allow me somehow to answer this question, at least coming from an expert, if I may. You don't have to issue digital certificates yourself. There are certification authorities that are there to issue digital certificates for you. If you don't have any reasons to issue digital certificates, then you shouldn't implement your own certification authority. However, these certification services providers offer the so-called RA service, and therefore you act as a registration authority for your employees, and therefore the RA service is a trusted service today in the current legislation. So we are not talking anymore about certification services providers. We are talking about trust services providers, and the RA is one of the trust services. So yes, you don't have to issue digital certificates. However, you are still liable in order to ensure that your RA is implemented properly, because at the end of the day, you are the source of the certificate request. And in one way or another, not issuing certificates doesn't mean you are relieved somehow from your responsibility. So that's a short note. I had few slides to discuss this particular, and to address this particular question and others related to it. Happy to discuss, and obviously the colleagues from the NCDC would be able to address any of these points. My last a part of the presentation is somehow to talk about how Pki is regulated today, and in one way or another, I think this was addressed today by some of the colleagues from NCDC. I think the whole idea is that you are not on your own as an organization that needs to, that is required today. Not even needs, you are required today to embrace technologies like PKI. However, you are not on your own. There's a complete national framework that is basically operated by the NCDC. There are commercial players that are offering PKI services. There is a regulatory framework to address any legal questions that you may have. And I think the point about this part of the slides is to basically remind us all that in the current national PKI framework, the governance part is already covered. The infrastructure part is covered, but the enabling part is really important, and then it is covered through investment from organizations like NCDC. And I think the message here, and unfortunately I don't have much time, the message here is to say that for PKI to be able to succeed, for organizations to be able to embrace PKI, awareness is important. Supporting these organizations while they onboard into PKI is very important. And certainly the mission of the NCDC and its partners is certainly to offer a trusted infrastructure, but more importantly, to ensure like the right support is there in order to accompany you as service providers during your journey of onboarding to PKI. I had a few slides to talk about this, and I'm more than happy to discuss further. I think I would have needed like an hour to be able to cover all what I wanted to cover. So I hope that this was useful in one way or another for you guys, and then available for any questions. Yeah. Thank you.